Buddhism for Today, The Essential Wisdom of the Threefold Lotus Sutra by Nikkyo Niwano. Part 2, The Sutra of the Lotus Flower of the Wondrous Dharma, Chapter 6, Giving Assurance of Buddhahood. 3 essential points about assurance of Buddhahood. Assurances of Buddhahood are contingent on practice. As already explained, an assurance of Buddhahood means to receive specific promise from the Buddha that you will surely become a Buddha. The term assurance of Buddhahood has 3 subtle yet extremely important nuances that we must fully understand right from the beginning. The first is that Shakyamuni does not say, "You are Buddhas," but "You will become Buddhas." In the eyes of the Buddha, all living beings possess Buddha nature, and consequently, there is no doubt that everyone is capable of attaining Buddhahood. But taking the Buddha to have said simply that "You are Buddhas" will lead to a terrible misunderstanding. We are likely to misinterpret these words to mean that, even in our state of delusion, we might actually be enlightened, or that we can reach Buddhahood as easily as riding on an escalator. We should note that an assurance of Buddhahood always comes with a condition. You will certainly become a Buddha if you continue to practice in this manner. The assurance of Buddhahood is often, for good reason, compared to a certificate of admission to a school or university. It is not a diploma, only an admission certificate. The assurance of Buddhahood verifies that you have passed the entrance exam to the most elite university, which confers the degree of Buddhahood. If you study there for some years, you will certainly graduate to become a Buddha. Consequently, receiving an assurance of Buddhahood means that, from that moment forward, you must practice all the more and devote even greater effort towards the attainment of Buddhahood. What a great source of joy it is to be admitted to the Buddha's university with an assurance that we, too, will become Buddhas. All those gathered in the great assembly naturally leaped for joy when Shariputra became the first Shravaka to receive this assurance from the Buddha, in Chapter 3, a parable. The joy of all those gathered in the assembly is the same that we feel today. We, too, have already gained admission to that university, something that we will come to understand better as we progress to Chapter 8, the assurance of Buddhahood given to the 500 disciples, and Chapter 9, the assurance given to those trained and still in training. There is no reason to be discouraged if, in our worldly life, we are not able to attend a top university, because those of us who wholeheartedly believe in the Lotus Sutra and embody its spirit have already gained entrance to the University of Buddhahood, the most elite university in existence. When we reflect on this, how proud we are and how worthwhile life becomes. Why disciples desire assurances of Buddhahood. This natural feeling of pride and joy must never lead to a self-congratulatory sense of complacency, however. The assurance of Buddhahood loses all meaning if we turn it into a solitary joy by limiting it to ourselves. This is the second of the 3 important points about assurances of Buddhahood that we must not fail to understand. At the end of the first verse in this chapter of the text of the sutra, Madhgalyayana, Subhuti, Katyayana, and others appeal to the Buddha in unison as follows. Great hero, world-honored one, your constant desire is to put the world at ease. Be pleased to bestow such assurances upon us. What they are saying is, the Buddha always wishes to make all living beings feel at ease. We also desire to become Buddhas and do the same. Please give us your assurance that we, too, will become Buddhas. The disciples are not merely seeking their own liberation and Buddhahood, or their own peace of mind by becoming Buddhas. Their ultimate goal is to make all living beings happy. This is a crucial point. We must understand that the real intention behind their urgent desire to receive assurances of Buddhahood is to obtain the unimpeded power to help others be happy. If we do not realize this fact, we are likely to get the mistaken impression that the disciples are pressing the Buddha for only their own enlightenment and peace of mind. Faith requires inspiration. The third important point is the question of why the Buddha's disciples are so persistent in their desire to have the Buddha call on them by name and give them individual assurances of Buddhahood. Surely they have already clearly understood from the Buddha's exposition of the Dharma so far that they can all become Buddhas. Some readers may find this puzzling. This is where intellectual understanding and faith differ. In Chapter 4, Faith and Understanding, I wrote that Buddhism is a teaching that can be understood through reason. For the purpose of intellectual curiosity, understanding the sutra through reason may be enough, but, when it comes to faith, a mere intellectual grasp of the sutra is superficial. What we truly understand must inspire us, and only then does it generate faith. When we have faith, the desire to act for the benefit of individuals and society also naturally develops. Understanding that becomes action for the benefit of individuals and society is devotion, or faith. Authentic devotion possesses the power to move us to action. From where does inspiration, the foundation of this power, arise? It doesn't come from theoretical arguments. It comes from one heart touching another. When we come in contact with a uniquely impressive person, and what the person says resounds within our hearts, their words may inspire us to follow them, even if doing so changes our lives. The ability to motivate this fierce determination within us is the greatness of the manifest Buddha Shakyamuni. When we recognize universal truth in the words of Shakyamuni, whom Buddhists look up to and emulate as the ideal human being, we receive a great power that transcends mere intellectual understanding and gives us an uplifting strength. This is why the disciples were eager to hear the words, "You will become Buddhas," directly from Shakyamuni, the world-honored one. Hearing this single phrase from the mouth of the Buddha was an inspiration greater than the support of tens of millions of people. Shakyamuni's disciples pleaded with him, vowing that if the Buddha were to say only those few words, they would sacrifice anything, even at great expense to their lives, to follow those teachings. They were determined never to turn back or become careless about their practice. This deep trust in the Buddha is the sign of true faith and provides a good model for our own lives of faith and devotion that we should take to heart. The intellectual comprehension that one can achieve by simply reading books on Buddhism and listening to lectures or Dharma talks is still a shallow understanding. Without personally experiencing the illusion of being lifted up by Shakyamuni's hand of great compassion, our understanding will fail to produce the power to liberate ourselves or aid in the liberation of others. Our admiration for Shakyamuni Buddha is certainly not worship of a false idol, nor is our recitation of the Odaimoku, taking refuge in the Lotus Sutra, some kind of magical incantation. These practices are ways of making the Buddha's mind our own. Through Shakyamuni Buddha, whom we revere as our teacher and spiritual parent, we can enter directly into the liberating embrace of the focus of our devotion, the eternal original Buddha. If we keep in mind these three essential points about assurances of Buddhahood while reading this chapter, we will clearly understand every aspect of its teachings. With that, let us proceed to the text of the chapter. Mahakashyapa's Assurance of Buddhahood. After speaking the verse that ends chapter 5, the world-honored one turns to address the assembly. My disciple Mahakashyapa, who has fully understood my teachings and is firmly determined to undertake bodhisattva practices for the sake of the people of the world, will in future lifetimes serve innumerable Buddhas and proclaim their teachings far and wide. In his final lifetime, he will become a Buddha called Brilliant Light Tathagata, worthy of offerings, universally wise, complete in clarity and conduct, well-departed, fathomer of the world, fearless leader, expert trainer, teacher of heavenly beings and humans, Buddha, and world-honored one. His domain will be known as Radiant Virtue, and his era will be called Great Adornment. The lifetime of this Buddha will be 120,000 years. And, following his extinguishment, his Dharma will be conveyed properly in the world for a long span of 200,000 years. His teaching will also remain in the world in a merely formal fashion for 200,000 years after that. Earlier, when Kashyapa expressed his joy and gratitude for the Buddha's teachings by telling the parable of the rich father and the poor son, the world-honored one perceived that he had fully realized the Buddha's teachings, that his faith and devotion were profound, and that his determination was firm. This is also demonstrated by the Buddha's words of praise in the beginning of chapter 5, which I quote directly from the text of the sutra. Good, Kashyapa, you have well described the real merits of a Tathagata. They are truly as you have said. When the Buddha offers assurances of Buddhahood to those in the assembly, he reveals the names of those future Buddhas and also specifies the names of their domains and eras. He also bestows on Kashyapa the 10 epithets of the Buddha, beginning with the name Brilliant Light Tathagata. As explained in detail on pages 123 to 124, these 10 titles, beginning with Tathagata and worthy of offerings, demonstrate that a Buddha perfectly and completely embodies both virtues and powers. This means that Kashyapa would, in accord with his practice, become a Buddha equal to Shakyamuni. Shakyamuni Buddha clarifies that anyone who completely realizes the truth will become a Buddha on an equal footing with him, demonstrating how high a value Shakyamuni placed on the truth. The Buddha continues, the domain of Brilliant Light Tathagata will be extremely beautiful, devoid of impurity, dreadful things, or filth. Its roads will be level and smooth, and the ground will be covered with lapis lazuli. It will have rows of majestic trees and roads lined with ropes of golden thread. All manner of beautiful flowers will rain from the heavens, and every inch of that domain will be immaculate. Living beings who practice the teachings of that Buddha as bodhisattvas will be innumerable, and Travakas who seek the instruction of that Buddha will also be uncountable. Mara deeds, that is to say, phenomena, afflictions, and actions that impede the teachings of that Buddha will never occur because, even though Maras and their followers will be present in that domain, they will protect the teachings of the Buddha. This passage depicts the ideal state of the world. The first half of this description evokes a beautiful city in any contemporary cosmopolitan country, but the latter half strikes us as a world that is the exact opposite of the one we live in today. Even as our world approaches the ideal in terms of material progress, in spiritual terms, it has made comparatively little headway. These words of the Buddha are like a mirror vividly reflecting this greatest shortcoming of modern society. Recognizing this reality, how can we fail to join together in order to share the spirit of the Lotus Sutra with as many people as possible? How can we not be firmly determined to realize in this world as soon as possible this ideal society described by the Buddha? Mara and Mara deeds. We should pay special attention to this line in the sutra's description of that Buddha's domain, as it appears in the text of the sutra. It will have no Mara deeds, for though it will have Maras and their followers, they will all protect the Buddha's teachings. Mara is the name of a heavenly being who is said to have tried to impede Shakyamuni's quest for awakening. For this reason, obstructions to the proper way came to be referred to collectively as Mara, literally meaning the destroyer. Mara followers, as the name suggests, are in the service of Maras. They have considerable power, appearing one after another in the lives of those who aspire to realize the Buddha way, beguiling and confusing them. Mara followers conspire together like a gang in order to obstruct and intimidate those who aspire to practice the proper Buddha way. Mara and his Mara followers appeared in Bodh Gaya, where Shakyamuni was deep in meditation just prior to his enlightenment, and they attempted to use various obstacles to impede him. Had Shakyamuni been an ordinary living being, he would have been summarily defeated, but precisely because he prevailed against Mara's enticements, obstacles, and threats, his enlightenment became absolutely unshakable. Thus, judging from the results Shakyamuni achieved, the obstruction of Mara and his Mara followers can even be considered a source of power that aided his enlightenment. The Maras can be broadly divided into two categories. The first category is the Maras within oneself, meaning our instinctive impulses and mistaken views that perturb an upright mind. These include our defilements, the troubles that the five aggregates, the components that make up our body and mind, cause us to suffer, and even physical death. The second category is the Maras outside oneself, which refers to external enticements and pressures. In an ideal Buddha domain, such as radiant virtue, all living beings sincerely seek the Buddha's teachings or truly practice them. Even if these living beings are enticed by instinctive impulses and mistaken views, those obstructions will work to stiffen their resolve to seek the way. As a result, the Maras within oneself end up working to protect the Buddha Dharma. This is why Mara deeds do not occur, despite the presence of Mara and Mara followers. Maras outside oneself refers to the actions and speech of those who, like the deity Mara in the story of the Buddha, tempt, criticize, obstruct, and threaten living beings who strive to practice the Buddha's teachings or spread them to others. But as the saying goes, the greater the sinner, the greater the saint. In an ideal Buddha domain like radiant virtue, even such harmful people are completely transformed and use their great strength to protect the Buddha Dharma. Because all living beings possess Buddha nature, even a terrifying person, once they awaken to their Buddha nature, is capable of what a good-natured but weaker person could never accomplish. All of us know real-life examples of people like this from among those around us. The Buddha teaches that, whether it is the Maras within oneself or the Maras outside oneself, all work as negative forces when living beings exist in a state of delusion. But if people realize the proper way, Maras immediately transform into positive forces. Therefore, rather than thinking of radiant virtue as an ideal, faraway domain, we should understand it as the interior of our minds when we lead a life of faith and devotion, and as a perspective from which to think about the practical problems of our own society. In order to eliminate Mara deeds and transform Maras into positive energy, we must encourage Maras to transform themselves. How can we do so? There is but a single course open to us. Seek the teachings of the Buddha, have faith in them, and put them into practice. The real way to have no Mara deeds is to have faith in the true teachings of the Buddha and to put them into practice. When we do so, the Mara deeds that adhere to our minds and bodies dissipate like the mist before the morning sun, allowing our nature to shine forth. Assurances of Buddhahood for Mahamadhyayana, Subhuti, and Mahakatyayana. The Buddha next restates this teaching in verse concluding Kashypa's assurance of Buddhahood. At that time, Mahamadgalyayana, Subhuti, and Mahakatyayana, and others, all trembling with unbridled anticipation, place their hands together in reverence, and with a single mind gaze up at the Buddha without removing their eyes from him. After a time, they begin to speak in unison. World-honored one, who bravely drives away all that is malevolent and unwholesome, Buddha, who has the power to teach and lead all living beings, please have compassion and give us your word of assurance. Please inspire us with your words of encouragement to be ever more diligent in our practice. If you perceive the determination in the depths of our hearts and give us your assurance of Buddhahood, we will receive it with genuine gratitude as a shower of sweet dew that cools and refreshes us. We are like starving people from a land ravaged by famine, who suddenly come upon a feast that has been laid out for a king. It is such a magnificent feast that we hesitate to touch anything, and out of fear we dare not begin eating first. But if the king should give us his words of assurance, we would be relieved to partake of that feast. Likewise, we realize the error of our assumption that it was sufficient simply to free ourselves from our delusions and distress, and we became aware of the supreme wisdom of the Buddha. But we did not know exactly how to attain that wisdom for ourselves. Even though we heard the teachings that we also would surely become Buddhas, somehow we remained timid, wondering if we could really become Buddhas, just like those starving people could not eat the king's feast that lay before their eyes. If the Buddha were to utter an assurance of our Buddhahood, we would attain peace of mind. The Buddha always desires to put the people of the world at ease. We ask you to bestow on us your assurance of our Buddhahood. If you do, just like the people who receive the king's permission to partake of the feast, we will be able to single-mindedly devote ourselves to the way of bodhisattva practice and diligently work for the sake of the people of the world. The world-honored one, having already sensed the firm resolve of his great disciples, instantly grants the Buddha's request, giving him an assurance of Buddhahood. His name as a Buddha will be eminent attributes to Tathagata, his era will be known as replete with treasures, and his domain will be called Treasures Arising. Next, the Buddha bestows his assurance of Buddhahood on Mahakatyayana, declaring that his name as a Buddha will be Jambunada Glimmering Gold Tathagata. To Mahamadgalyayana he bestows an assurance of Buddhahood and declares his name as a Buddha to be Fragrance of Tamalpaltra and Sandalwood Tathagata, his era to be known as Joy Abounding, and his domain to be called Joyous Mind. Connected by the events of past lifetimes. Some readers may not see how this episode could have any relevance to them, since it has to do with the events concerning Shakyamuni Buddha and his disciples in India long ago. But in fact, it is not removed from our lives today, as we will discover when we read the final lines of the last verse in this chapter, which I quote directly. To you, my disciples, whose dignity and virtue are complete, 500 in number, I hereby give assurance that, in a future lifetime, each of you will become a Buddha. I will now tell of the events of past lifetimes, my own along with yours. All of you do listen well. After disclosing this promise, the Buddha's exposition moves on to Chapter 7, the parable of the conjured city. These events of past lifetimes involve not only Shakyamuni and those 500 disciples, but the links between every Buddha and all of their disciples since the infinite past and extending into the infinite future. This is because those who have truly understood the teachings of the Buddha never fail to transmit them to others and cannot help working to aid the liberation of living beings. By continuing this activity over a long span of time, one can become a Buddha, and those who are liberated by the activity of such a Buddha, in turn become Buddhas themselves, by transmitting the teachings and continuing the practice of liberating others. In this way, innumerable Buddhas have appeared since the infinite past, and their appearance will give rise to infinite Buddhas hereafter, ensuring that this baton rally of teaching and transforming living beings will continue into the infinite future. This is what is meant by our mutual connections originating in the events of past lifetimes. We today are fortunate to have been able to encounter the Lotus Sutra. This means that we have been given assurance of becoming Buddhas, conditional on our practice of the teachings of the Buddha. The manifest Buddha, the historical Buddha Shakyamuni who appeared in our world as a human being, entered nirvana some 2,500 years ago. But the eternal original Buddha is timeless. The eternal original Buddha bestows on us an assurance of Buddhahood through the Lotus Sutra. This is how we, today, receive our assurances of Buddhahood. The importance of repetition. For brevity's sake, I have shortened commentary on repetitious portions of this chapter, but I should make an important clarification. When the Buddha bestowed his assurance of Buddhahood on Kashyapa, His domain, radiant virtue, was described as an overwhelmingly beautiful and ideal land, and afterward the Buddha repeated this description in verse. Although each assurance carries a slightly different wording, the same basic description was given to Subhuti, Mahamadgalyayana, and Mahakatyayana. When reciting the sutras, we should take care not to recite such passages carelessly, because we might think they unnecessarily repeat what came before. Repetition has a very important function in our spiritual life. The study of human psychology has demonstrated the value of repetition. To give a well-known example of its importance, consider the narrative structure of a Japanese folk tale like The Adventures of Momotaro. As the story goes, when Momotaro was plodding along on his way to the island of the ogres, a little dog walked up to him and inquired, "Momotaro, Momotaro, what are those things hanging from your belt?" Momotaro answered him, "These are the most delicious millet dumplings in all of Japan." Whereupon the dog said to him, "Can I have one?" Momotaro replied, "I can't give you one because I am going to the island of the ogres to rid it of those beasts, and these millet dumplings are my lunch. But I'll give you some if you go along with me." The dog replied, I'll go too. I'll be by your side wherever you go." And so receiving one of those millet dumplings from Momotaro, he gobbled it down voraciously. Next, a monkey came up to Momotaro and made exactly the same inquiry. "Momotaro, Momotaro, what are those things hanging from your belt?" Momotaro answered him, "These are the most delicious millet dumplings in all of Japan." When we tell a story to children, they don't find it interesting unless we repeat ourselves in this manner. Moreover, if we abbreviate these repetitious sections, telling the child something like, "The monkey ate the millet dumpling just like the dog, and so did the pheasant," the story becomes dull and uninteresting to them. The children, who have been enchanted by the folk tale up to that point, quickly become inattentive or fall asleep. Doing something repeatedly leaves a deep impression on us if we concentrate wholeheartedly. Anyone who tries reciting this chapter should be able to sense the way in which both the image of the ideal human being symbolized by the 10 epithets or titles of the Buddha, and the representations of an ideal human society epitomized by the descriptions of the beautiful domains of the future Buddhas, permeate the innermost recesses of our hearts and minds. Expressions such as mentioned above or the aforesaid are acceptable in business documents, government reports, and the like. We could not get along in today's hectic society without such abbreviations. When it comes to cultivating the practice of Buddhism in any serious way, however, such corner-cutting is impermissible. Musicians and athletes, for instance, know that unless they repeat something tens or even hundreds of times over and over with total concentration, their skills will never improve. The same is true of cultivating spiritual practice. As an example, let's consider recitation of the O-Daimoku, Namu Myoho Renge Kyo, which means, "I take refuge in the Sutra of the Lotus Flower of the Wondrous Dharma." Logically speaking, a single recitation is sufficient if we pour our hearts entirely into the words. But for most of us, unless we recite it 3 or even as many as 10 times, the conviction of faith in and reliance on the Lotus Sutra fails to reach the depths of our heart. Conversely, while it is true that repetition is important, reciting the O-Daimoku 1,000 or 10,000 times may cause us to become bored or distracted, and we could find ourselves merely mouthing the O-Daimoku. This is where we tend to fall into a type of formalism, which means performing actions merely because they are prescribed, or doing so for the sake of appearances without focusing on their deeper significance. We must realize that true cultivation of the practices of Buddhism to attain awakening requires 3 elements: do virtuous or good things, do them wholeheartedly, and repeat them over and over again.